Hi guys. Today we are reading the short, I guess it's a vignette, Bread by Margaret Atwood. This is the second, or I think it's the first story in your student reader from pre-AP. So hopefully at this point you've already read the story, and now I'm going to be kind of walking you through the steps that I want you to take to learn what we need to learn from the story. And what we're learning is our ability to notice, understand, and write about the deeper meaning of details um, in a piece of writing. So now that you've read it, I'm going to walk you through the first step of the worksheet that goes along with it. So if you could follow along with me, we're just going to look at paragraph 1, and I'll read it out loud to you, and then we'll take a look at what the worksheet looks like. Imagine a piece of bread. You don't have to imagine it. It's right here in the kitchen, on the breadboard, in its plastic bag, lying beside the bread knife. The bread knife is an old one you picked up at an auction. It has the word bread carved into the wooden handle. You open the bag, pull back the wrapper, cut yourself a slice. You put butter on it, then peanut butter, then honey, and fold it over. Some of the honey runs out onto your fingers and you lick it off. It takes you about a minute to eat the bread. This bread happens to be brown, but there's also white bread in the refrigerator and a heel of rye you got last week, round as a full stomach then, now going moldy. Occasionally you make bread. You think of it as something relaxing to do with your hands. All right, so that's the first paragraph, and then since you've already read it, you know that for the rest of the vignette, it goes on to explore different settings and bread in different settings, and I think there are 5 settings in total. So on your worksheet, there's space for you to do work for each of those 5 settings, and there are certain things that you should be noticing about the 5 settings. Number 1, where is this taking place? So what is the setting? And I'd also like to mention that sometimes that setting, or always setting, is a where and a when, but in this case, I'm only going to be focusing on the where. What? So in this case, what are we looking at? We're looking at the bread, like the descriptions of the bread, what's going on with the bread, how much is there specifically. And then the deeper meaning that we're looking for here is the value of the bread in each setting. So what value does the bread have as the settings change, and the amount of bread changes as well. So you're going to do this for each of those settings, but I'm going to walk you through the first one so that you understand what I'm looking for. So if we look back at this paragraph, our where, I mean, it's very obvious. It tells us where, right? We're in our kitchen, my kitchen, or your kitchen, whoever, right? I said my in my answer, but I also added a descriptor because it's clear that it's not just a kitchen, it's a kitchen that's well stocked. It's got plenty of food in it, specifically bread. And so when we get to that second column, the what, we're talking about what are we looking at? How much bread are we looking at? We're looking at an abundance of bread options, right? Like they've got white bread and they've got brown bread and they've got other kinds of bread. And sometimes they make bread, they've got tons of bread. So when we look at this well-stocked kitchen with an abundance of bread options, and we're asking ourselves, well, how valuable is the bread there? We can safely say, and this is an assumption that we have to make, right? It doesn't actually say this in the story, but we can imply that the bread has very little value in this setting. It's something that just kind of is. It's there, right? Because it can be thrown away, it can be allowed to go moldy. Sometimes we make it. We've got other kinds of bread to choose from. It's not a very valuable commodity in this case. It's just something that's always there and something that's always available. So when we take these three pieces of information and we want to write that out in a sentence, we want to write a complex sentence about it. Like we want to write a sentence that sounds good, that explains kind of the meaning of of bread in this paragraph, in this first setting. So we want to write that complex sentence might look something like this, combining all three of the ideas above. It says, in my well-stocked kitchen, there is an abundance of bread options that give the bread very little value. And that gets, that gets all through the where, the what, the why, or so in this case, I'm saying the why is the deeper meaning. It gets all three of those together in one sentence. The reason it's a complex sentence is because it combines those ideas, right? We could give each of those ideas its own sentence, but we didn't. We've combined them, making it a complex sentence. What we're missing is evidence, quoted evidence. So in addition to having that complex sentence, then we want a piece of quoted evidence from the story that supports what we're saying, that this well-stocked kitchen has a lot of bread, and that bread has very little value. So for me, I've chosen the lines here. A heel of rye you got last week, round as a full stomach, then now going moldy. You can see that I've typed it in, so I've underlined it in the paragraph, but I've also typed it in to the worksheet, and you can see that I included the ellipsis there at the beginning because I'm not quoting the entire sentence, and I've cited, in this case, just the paragraph number, so that's why I wrote paragraph, I abbreviated paragraph there, paragraph 1, as it says in the book. Now, here's the deal. This work is acceptable. It does what it's asking you to do. Is it asking you to do something difficult? Probably for most of you, no. I would guess almost everybody in this class is able to read and do this to some extent. I would also expect that there are some of you who could do more than this. So if you were to want to show me something a little bit more complex than what I've put in the worksheet, then what you can do is write a more complex sentence that integrates the evidence into your sentence. So for example, it might look like this. In my well-stocked kitchen, there is an abundance of bread options that gives my bread very little value. As shown in the quote, a heel of rye you got last week, round as a full stomach, then now going moldy, paragraph 1, which is basically adding a transition between the first sentence that I wrote and the piece of evidence and combining it into one even longer and more complex sentence. So not that hard to do, right? It's not that hard to step it up a little bit. Is that going to show me that your writing is, really kind of creative and kind of taking off? No, but it shows me a slightly more complex skill that you have. If you really want to knock my socks off with this particular assignment, then you're going to do something more like this. In my well-stocked kitchen, a heel of rye I got last week, now going moldy, demonstrates that the bread of this setting has very little value, since it is abundant enough to let spoil, and then I cited the evidence at the end of the sentence. Now, this is a complex sentence that says all the same things as the previous sentences, but it does it in a much more individual way. It does it in a way that isn't quite as formulaic. So I've still got the where there at the beginning in my well-stocked kitchen, but then I've taken even a smaller part of the evidence because I've only chosen a part of the evidence that really supports what I'm going to say about it. A heel of rye I got last week, now going moldy. And that's describing, that's the thing that I'm talking about, right? But it's quoted directly from the paragraph. I've cut out the round and full as a stomach then because I saw it as a little bit too much information. You don't have to cut that out, but it just makes the sentence a little bit more concise, and I don't think it's that necessary. I've also changed the you in that quote to an I by putting brackets around it because it indicates that I've replaced that word to make it flow more nicely with the sentence that I've written. But the brackets say, hey, look, I'm acknowledging that I changed this quote just a little bit. And then I use the word demonstrates to say that, you know, this piece of evidence is demonstrating um, the deeper meaning. So I've put the deeper meaning earlier in the sentence, the very little value, and then the what I've actually expanded on a little bit. It's abundant. It's abundant enough to allow it to spoil. There's enough bread that allowing it to spoil isn't, you know, it's it's not a big deal, you know. So the bread has very little value. So I've actually given a little bit more detail there. So you have some options now. You can just do the work the way that it's asked, or you can try to stretch yourself and do some superior work when you write your complex sentences. There are 4 more settings in the story that you need to complete on your worksheet, and you need to be prepared to share that work with the class. Do as much as you can before we come back together to discuss. Good luck.